dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance.
Happy Sunday to you, Rob. Sunday is the 7th day of the Golarion calendar week, for those who are not familiar, and that translates to our day of Sunday. So, happy Sunday.
Fantastic. A very important area of convergence, critical to understanding Golarion time.
Hopefully you'll be listening to this on a toil day or a Tuesday.
Perhaps a wheeled day.
Wheeled day.
You know, here's the thing. Okay, sorry. This is
Swear to God it'll be out by Oath Day, Thursday.
Jokes aside, I think that this is a really terrific approach. Hello, this is Dungeon Master of None. I'm Rob.
I'm Matt.
We're talking about Golarion and the new Lost Omens World Guide, which is the recently-ish release.
2 years.
Yeah, more recently than the last time we talked about Golarion, I think. Campaign setting guide. And we've talked about Golarion before. It's the, grab bag catch-all setting for all of Pathfinder, but they've made some updates. And I don't know that we talked about it in great detail before. So that's what we're doing now.
Yeah, it's a guide to a campaign setting guide. Once again, from Dungeon Master of None. And on these episodes, we've covered everything from Spelljammer to Ravenloft to Greyhawk to our favorite Eberron to the Forgotten Realms.
Dark Sun.
Sun.
The only thing we haven't done, we haven't done like a full episode on Mystara. Or
Mystara and Dragonlance and maybe Birthright if we want to go into something that no one plays.
Those are coming, by the way, but
one day we will get to all of those. But Golarion is kind of odd in that, first off, unlike the rest of the ones in our series, this one is not by Wizards of the Coast. It is by Paizo for their Dungeons & Dragons offshoot game Pathfinder, though, considering that Paizo is founded as kind of the magazine publishing arm of Wizards of the Coast and staffed with a lot of people originally who worked at Wizards of the Coast, I consider it like a sub-dialect of Dungeons & Dragons, right? It's its own, group now. But
I agree, though I do want to talk a bit about the evolution of this setting, because I think it's come a long way. Before we get into that, let me finish my thought about months and days, since you started us with talking about Sunday. No. I'm sorry that I have to talk about this before I forget about it, but we have maybe talked about this. I don't know if we've addressed it directly, but right, when you're doing world building, there are some things that you should feel comfortable changing, and there's some things that you should maybe be a little bit wary about. So like when you're making a world, you don't put dogs in it and you're like, actually these are called floops. And then you're like, it's a, four-legged animal and it pants and wags its tail and sleeps by the fireplace. It's a floop.
Yeah.
Or like, they ride on these
Don't call wheat breadfruit, right?
Yes,
as the famous tweet says.
Yes. The point is, some things, whether or not it makes sense in your world, are going to be too difficult and too distracting. And I feel like days and months fall into that. If you ask your players to try to memorize a 6-day week and a 15-month calendar, they're not going to remember. So I think there are two approaches that you can take with this. One is you do what Pathfinder Golarion has done, and your names are Moon Day, Toil Day, Wheeled Day, things that are
as close as possible.
Yes. And then you've got rough months that are similar-ish. Months aren't so bad. The other approach that I think that you could take is you can do a French Republican calendar, and you've got 10 days and 3 decades or whatever,
right.
And then there's
first day
numerical.
Tuesday,
Yes.
Threes day,
duode,
something like that. Yeah.
I think anything else is just going to be too difficult to remember. So either you make it sound familiar, so that if you say it's Wields Day, they're like, oh, it's the middle of the week, or you just don't even bother, which is I think what Eberron does. I'm not sure if Eberron even does like weeks and months or days.
Yeah, they do. They do.
Wait, they don't do days of the week though.
I I think so.
No,
I think
sorry.
you're going to be disappointed.
Forgotten Realms is the one that doesn't do days of the week.
Right.
Has no weekdays, right? It's just months and the calendar. Am I right about this?
I don't know. I also don't care too much, but you're absolutely right. Like
Sorry.
these
Sorry for
are
dragging-
these are things that like you can't confuse your players on. And when we come to Golarion, right? This is I think one of our final. I'm sure we'll dig up another one, but maybe the final of what I like to call the Arth settings. It's not Earth, it's Arth, right?
Earth.
In the case of like Greyhawk, Oerth, right? Or
Oerth.
something like that.
Mhm.
And there's tons of these things. Like these are a staple of fiction, right? Robert E. Howard's Hyperborea, right, is just Earth. Same for Tolkien's Middle Earth. Like you can roughly draw the shapes of.
Same for Westeros. I mean, this is not a criticism. This is a fine tradition of fantasy storytelling, and you can still do a lot with it. There's nothing wrong with having a west and an east and roughly, similar continents. You can still be very creative within that. But yeah.
Exactly, right? The continents and the shape of the world and to some degree often the cultures are either a direct ripoff or like a more fantastical spin. And where let's say like Robert Howard or Tolkien, everything is like a direct ripoff, right? Or like Greyhawk, where that's kind of the case. Though Greyhawk's continents look a little bit different, right?
Mm-hmm. And
or
Golarian's
Forgotten
continents
Realms,
a little different.
a little different, but still the same basic
it's
idea.
The same.
Golarion goes the kind of farthest afield with the most of all of these types of settings. I would say if you're like looking for a general description of Golarion, it's two things, right? Rob mentioned one. It's a grab bag. There's like literally every adventure story trope and idea here. And two, everything is like very like crazy and fantastical. And there's all sorts of, it's not just describing a million kingdoms that are all more or less the same, right? There are crazy places.
And Golarion has been around for 20 years now. I don't know what year it is. But when it first came out, it was, and I think this was by design, a pretty generic setting. And it had some pretty interesting, unique places, but there was a lot of, I don't want to call it like copy paste, but it was, some things were given like very little attention. Famously, as we have discussed, I already forgot who it was. One of the designers didn't like dwarves, and they almost didn't make it into the final setting. And it has taken, 20 years to give them any sort of culture or background within Golarion. But I have to say that it has really been built out in the past 20 years, and it has really developed its own flavor and uniqueness. And the one thing that I think I've said before about Golarion, and Matt, I think you'll agree with me, is that as a whole, I don't know. I'm kind of ambivalent, but there are a lot of individual regions and nations and cities within Golarion, which I think are fantastic. And I've written down a bunch that I want to talk about.
Right. It's one of those, unlike maybe maybe let's say Eberron or Greyhawk, there's a lot of things in here that like are just so cool, and that like if you really want to, it's maybe the best campaign setting to pirate from, including its pirates, which are all very cool. Like it is the perfect one where you can grab a particular region or like site and stick it into your own world.
And I think it's designed that way. I also, as we're talking about this, Matt was mentioning to me right before we started, we've both read it used to be the Inner Sea World Guide. It came out.
So this is, if you want to think about this, like the third edition of the main campaign setting. The first one was, I think, pretty short, and it was called the Pathfinder Chronicles Gazetteer. It came out in 2008, and a lot of the bare bones of this was here. The next one, the Inner Sea World Guide, came out about 10 years ago, and has a very different kind of layout, much more focused on Avistan. And finally, we have the updated one from the last 2 years. I believe, what was this one called? The Lost Omens World Guide? The Lost
something.
Omens World Guide.
World Guide, that's right.
And, well, let's see. I think the original designer of the campaign setting, Jason Bullman, is no longer involved. They brought in, James Jacobs is still around. They've brought in a lot of new writers like Tanya DePass to work on this. Yeah, we're up to the 3rd edition of Golarion, and I really like this update to
Me too.
Golarion.
The one thing that I want to highlight that I think is really interesting and that I'm really impressed by here is all campaign settings run into the challenge of becoming static or stagnant.
Right.
It is.
Yeah. Is this a static campaign setting where the timeline never moves forward? Or is it like every year in real time, the timeline's moving forward like in the Forgotten Realms? What are you going to do with that?
Right. So I think Golarion does, in my opinion, like a really good job of splitting the difference, because the world is not static. There are new nations emerging. There are new innovations, technologies developing. There's, shifting alliances, new rulers,
New characters,
rise to the top,
yeah.
as often as a consequence of the outcomes of major adventure paths, right?
Right. The design here is like, basically you took all of 1st edition of Pathfinder's like 20 adventure paths, and those have all happened now. Right. If you use this guide, right? Like the events of them have gone forward. The evil overlords have risen up. The world wound has been closed. The rune lords are risen. All the things have changed. It's kind of exciting. Yeah.
It's cool. And it, all of the regions are familiar. Some things are quite dramatic, but for the most part, everything is roughly in the same place. You can still go to Cheliax or Absalom or most of these places, and so it does not close off older books or older campaigns necessarily. It's still useful, but it shows a world that is developing, but is, if you are attached to a certain part of it, or your players are, or they have roots, whatever, it does not, eliminate them. That's the thing with, I don't particularly dislike this, but D&D or Forgotten Realms will become just so, overburdened with contradictions, basically, and then they'll do a big reset. They'll do a big House of M.
Yeah.
Great, like, multiverse reset.
Crisis
like
on Infinite Earths. Yeah, they'll clean up the storylines. Yeah.
Spell Plague, or what's it called when the gods went down to Earth? To, like, just sort of, like, wipe everything clean, or just, like, reset, and start from scratch, which, again, I don't hate, but I really like. This is more difficult to do, I think, but it's very elegant, and I also like how it brings in all of those adventure paths, to say, like, this is sort of like the outcome of, Reign of Winter and Rise of the Rune Lords and all of these. I think that's very cool. It's very fun to read, and I think that, Matt, you and I think place a lot of weight on trying to reason through the outcomes of certain events, the existence of magic, and I think the Golarion increasingly is taking a really cool approach to this. It didn't used to. I think it's really, like, grown a lot, and I'm very impressed with the setting as it is now.
Right. I think your initial impression of Golarion, if you crack open this book, is that, like, there is not the kind of unifying theme that you will get in a Dark Sun, or even a more Arth-like setting like Greyhawk. Like, everything is very different. Like, if you set a campaign solely in the realm of the Mammoth Lords, right, that's going to be very different than a campaign set in the Mana Wastes, right?
The tone difference between something that takes place in, like, Ustalav compared to Alkenstar is just, it's going to be just off the wall, but that's okay, I think, and the setting can contain that, and your campaigns can contain.
So let's answer, before we get into any real specifics, let's answer two big questions, which is, what is this campaign, like, why would you run a campaign set in Golarion? Like, what are the upsides to that? And then two, if you're not going to do that, why should you, are there any reasons to read about or learn about Golarion, right? What are the benefits for people who want to use it as a campaign setting and people who just want to read some D&D lore for inspiration?
I think that's a good question. So, as I was reading this, I was thinking of that I do like this as a campaign setting, and there are some things about it that would make me want to run a campaign in one or more of these regions. I think that, personally, one of the things that Golarion does very well that would be compelling and a reason to use this over a different campaign setting or something that you homebrewed is their approach to, let's call it, science fantasy. There's basically a whole expedition to the Barrier Peaks like nation, Numeria, with a bunch of like androids and living metal and, you know, a crashed alien spaceship.
An android god now.
Android
well.
god, which is very cool. There's also Alkenstar, which is like it's basically America, the fantasy, you know, Old West with firearms and
wildfires, except they're magic fires,
right,
and tornadoes, all the things that America also has. Massive gun violence,
mutants with cannons and shit like that. It's just like rad as hell. There's also like a couple of other. I think that Cheliax personally remains like a very inspired fantasy setting to me. It's a basically
right. It's like, what if Gondor got ruled by a devil-worshipping decadent noble house, right?
Right. Like, what if Ancien Regime France never fell and just like made a pact with the devil, and they have beautiful opera houses and cathedrals and, you know, dances.
Rob, let me
and
tell you about a guy
and...
named Charles de Gaulle. Yeah.
So that would be my answer to the first question, is that there are some, I think, really inspired settings within Golarion that I think increasingly are well tied to the surrounding regions and the world as a whole, but would be really good places to set a totally unique campaign.
Right. I think one of the strengths of running a campaign in Golarion is that if you pick a single region, or like as you'll find out as we review this book, it's divided into kind of mega regions. If you pick a single region or mega region, there is no reason, if you like the theme of that region, to ever leave, right? If you're like, yes, I want to play one where there's just bandit kingdoms everywhere and we're exploring, perfect. You know, you go to the Broken Lands, right? If you're like, no, I want gothic horror fighting like demons and stuff like that, Eye of Dread, perfect. So yeah, staying in a specific region is super, super awesome. I think the other reason to run a campaign in Golarion is just like the adventure pass. There's a new adventure that will take you from low levels to high levels coming out every 6 months, and then a backlog of those for the past decade.
Yeah. Plus individual Pathfinder Society adventure paths and one-offs, and it's very rich with some of the best adventure designers living work for Paizo. They this is their bread and butter, and they do a really good job of it. You have a lot to draw from, and yeah, setting your campaign in Golarion itself means that you don't have to make so many adaptations. That's a strong argument, in my opinion, for actually, you know, just using the setting as written or close to as written.
Yeah, if you're coming from Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, which I would say that, you know, Pathfinder 2e is a system that we like. Pathfinder 1e is a system we've both played a lot, but like they're very similar to D&D. The, you know, adventures can be converted. People have done a lot of them online, but there's just so many more published adventures for Pathfinder by the publisher of the game than for Dungeons & Dragons Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah, and
they just crank them out like 2 a month, you know, for the past 15 years.
And though I think that the quality of 5th edition adventures has really improved in recent years, the Paizo started out strong and has never really wavered. The just average quality and value and entertainment of Paizo Adventures is just absolutely top notch, and it always has been. There are really, really no duds. There are some that are not like amazing, but they're all fun.
Okay, let's talk about this second question. Why would you just like, let's say you're not, okay, I've got my own homebrew world, or we are definitely playing, Dark Sun. Why would you ever read about Golarion if you're not going to run a campaign? So what is there to offer everyone else?
That's a great question. I mean, I like reading this, and increasingly, this is an unfair standard to put anybody to, but my metric for like, is a book good or is it bad, is like, was I excited to read it? Did I enjoy reading it? And that's an extremely intangible thing. I think it has to do with how.
What does it do for me, DM Rob?
It has its intangibles, like, is it fun? Is it interesting? Are there new ideas? Is it well written? And I think on all of those sort of fuzzy measures, Lost Omens World Guide does a really good job. Beyond that, I think that the authors of this book are paying very close attention to, could you adventure in this region? Have they seeded it with a lot of ideas, characters, themes, objects, whatever? And that is when designing my own worlds or, improving or making changes to one, I am always trying to, deepen the number of hooks or potential adventures, or just the feel of there's things to do and see that may come in as relevant. And I think that Golarion is just a rich source for that. There's a lot that you can just borrow or steal directly that are just great adventure hooks.
Yeah. I think stealing adventure hooks, stealing like locations and NPCs, I would say the NPCs in this are a million times more interesting than the NPCs you'll find in the Forgotten Realms, from rulers to like crime lords to like weird monsters scattered throughout. And yeah, just a ton of locations. And because of that, like grab bag, kitchen sink, tonal difference as you travel around the world, yeah, whatever the theme of your campaign is, you're going to find like one region that like aligns pretty closely with that theme. And so you're going to find a lot. One of the downsides of the new book is that it is a little shorter. But it does seem like the intention is to make more focused location books on each of these places. Plus, there's, again, 15 years of publishing on them that you can go back to. I'd say one of the other upsides of reading this is if you're looking for something that is beyond the like traditional medieval fantasy stuff, there's a lot of inspiration. For example, like the solar system of Golarion is super interesting. So is weirder places like Geb and Nex and Numeria or Numenaria. Sorry, the one that's not the Monty Cook
not
set.
Numenera. Numeria. Yeah.
Numeria, right? See, now everyone knows why we're always confused. Numeria is where Conan the Barbarian rules techno dystopia with robots and barbarians. Crazy fantastical magic and a ruined Atlantis and all that kind of stuff. So I would say, stealing from this, again, super easy to do, super cool.
Yeah, there's only a bit in this book, but there's a full description of the solar system, the underwater realms to the extent that they exist, the continents beyond Avistan, which is kind of the central focus. I really appreciated this because I think that it's tempting to spend too much time on this, but also it's annoying when the book doesn't say anything about the lands beyond the map that were shown. And right. I thought that this struck a perfect balance.
This is also, and we won't talk too much on this because I know very few people care but us, but now seeing this book after 3 editions, this is like layout like perfected, just the right amount of introduction, of timeline, of explaining like things like the solar system and the other continents and the planes really quickly, where you can get a good picture of it.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, the art in this book is absolutely phenomenal. There's like, for every region or chapter, there's like 5 NPC portraits. It's so good.
I like Matt. I'm going to try not to spend too much time gushing about this, but in terms of book design, this is Paizo is just knocking out of the park. It's the pinnacle. They've done a great job with sidebars, communicating information that you need. They've got a little like ribbon every other page, so you know where you are in the book. Like, I'm sorry, this is like
so nice
little stuff, but it's such a fantastic. I think these things matter. Paizo has mentioned that they took a lot of like inspiration and studied how textbooks are written, and I think it really shows. Again, it's a little thing, but I really appreciate it as somebody who reads a lot of these books, that it really organizationally was top notch.
I think, looking at this book in Golarion, which, I've been reading about for a long time, I just want to say one of the other things I really like about it is how I think they've attempted and have been mostly successful to update some of the parts of their setting that just like kind of sucked, or one were boring, or two were #problematic. And I mean that seriously.
Yes.
They were kind of seriously problematic. Specifically, they're not Africa. Africa continent has improved leaps and bounds, as in it like has its own history now and a variety of cultures and places. Some of the parts that were like kind of boring are now no longer boring. So
yeah, this was the other thing I was going to say about it, is that when it emerged, it was, for obvious reasons, in a lot of places, a very shallow copy paste of D&D, because Pathfinder was basically, a sub-dialect of Dungeons and Dragons. And it included things like, it had all like, aboleths and beholders and all these things. And the parts of that were important, the Paizo writers have developed and evolved. And the parts that weren't were just kind of removed or cut away. And you can still, I think what's so fascinating to me now about Golarion is that you can tell there's elves, orcs, dwarves, whatever. There's all the, fantasy races. But now there's so many more that are distinct and unique, and they're not just kind of like tacked on, like here's a cat people race, here's a bird people race. Like, they have real deep roots in the setting. And it's funny because like some of this is because of copyright reasons, but the aboleths are now Abelgothus or something, and they have a much like, they're clearly like the same thing, but they're much deeper and more distinct to the setting, and they're tied to Earthfall and all of these like significant events. And again, it's still like clear that the roots of this are in Dungeons and Dragons, but it's very distinct now. It's in a lot of ways not just even playing an elf or a dwarf or whatever in Pathfinder is going to feel different in some very interesting, to me, kinds of ways than playing it in Forgotten Realms.
Yeah, okay, let's drill down to some specifics. Let's start with talking about ancestries in this setting, or species, and let's fold in another broad topic like history. Like, what's cool about history and ancestries in Golarion?
So we've talked about this. Wait, did we? We did a review of the 2e book, right? Sorry.
Yes, we did.
So the thing that I really appreciate, and in my opinion, there is no real way to be unproblematic about having fantasy species or races, but I think that what Pathfinder and Golarion has done is as good as you will ever get. And you now have ancestries instead of races, and there's... God, I should have looked this up. I don't even know how many there are at this point in time, but there's an extreme diversity of different types of ancestries within Pathfinder, and they are not, for the most part, geographically bound. They're not distinct to any sort of environment, and there's a lot of subcultures within those ancestries, right? There's Mwangi elves, and then there's also elves from, the Snowlands, and then there's, and they all
the
have
weird elves that wear masks that guard the runes of not Atlantis, right?
Exactly.
The I would say, two like interesting ancestries that I think are super cool is one, elves, like they've been done in a super diverse way that feels very cool. They're weird and mysterious. Spoilers, they're not from this planet. They have their own planet that they kind of travel back and forth to, that they don't let outsiders know about. And another ancestry that I think they do really well are gnomes. Gnomes are often the kind of stepchild of they're somewhere between halflings and dwarves and elves, and we're not really sure what to do with them. They have their own unique origin in Pathfinder in that they're from the Fey world, which is called the First World in Golarion, which I think is a great Feywild, maybe even better than the Feywild.
I prefer this to the Feywild. I like the idea of the First World being sort of like the Fey. Yeah, I love the First World.
And the hook, which is great for gnome adventurers, right, is because they're not from this reality, is that they must seek new experiences, or they can wither away, right? Mm-hmm. So they're constantly looking for new sensations and adventures and knowledge and inventions and stuff like that. A great backstory for any gnome adventurer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much assumed background for the core D&D races that Golarion is able to sort of shed. So you have dwarves, elves, gnomes, whatever, but they're able to give them, like Matt just said, like a especially in the case of gnomes are really the odd children of D&D, a much more compelling origin. And I think that this is one of the reasons why I switched to Pathfinder in the first place, is that they were able to make some changes and adjust some things that are just remain impossible to address in a wizard's property. And it took a while to really bear fruit, but I think that, at this point it's really unique what Golarion has done.
I also think their history is pretty great. It's set up perfectly for adventurers. One of the defining events of the Golarion campaign setting is that Erodin, the god of humanity and basically good things, like invention, progress, civilization, kind of his basically just kind of died all of a sudden. And it's one of those central mysteries, like the morning is to Eberron. Yep. That will never be explained, can be used for any plot hook in your campaign. And in the past 100 or 1,000 years since that has happened, the entire world has been adrift. It is literally the Age of Lost Omens, in that every prophecy that was made has not come true. And so, whereas before people had magical prophecy to guide them, no longer the case. Everything's up in the air, up to your adventuring party.
Yeah, we mentioned this before. It is a great, just like the morning, I think this is just a really great thing to have in your setting. I don't think you should try to solve it in any of your campaigns, but I think it can be a thing that around which a lot of adventuring orients itself. And what happened to Erodin is it's perfect, and it disrupts sort of the status quo in, like Matt said, a really interesting way. It changes kind of the rules of the setting that makes it great for adventuring.
Yeah, I think magic is another thing that is really good about this campaign setting, in that there's a lot of unique magical traditions that all fit really, really well into the mechanics of a D&D like game, like Pathfinder, and just are great for character building. You've got demonic or devil magic, you've got ice magic, you've got the sort of traditional magic, you've got magic of divine religions, that are not gods. You have a bunch of really great deities. You've got some really cool magic schools in like Geb and Nex, and the one new magic school they introduced in the Moangwe Expanse, the Arcanium in Corvosa. Like, there's magic is done really, really well here. It works.
Yeah, this is another thing I would have mentioned for why play this rather than something else. Another thing that Paizo and Pathfinder do really well is factions, subclasses, prestige classes, a distinct, to the extent that this is exciting to you, I like it. Playing a Aldori Sword Lord or a Arc Lord of Nex or, Hell Knight Armiger, these are all things that, you don't need a subclass to do any of these things, but Pathfinder does a great job of giving you a package of flavor and mechanics that works really well and that fits really well into the world. Like, it's extremely compelling if you're playing in a campaign that takes place in Cheliax or Aldor or whatever to play one of these relevant subclasses or to encounter them as you're adventuring, which I don't think is the case necessarily for a lot of what used to be D&D's prestige classes.
I also love all of the minor deities in Pathfinder. So like the major deities that are universal and like have the more established religions, Abadar, Desna or something, they're all fine. They're all pretty like, good design of gods.
They're good.
I think the real standouts are like the lesser deities, Besmara, the pirate queen, the red mantis, killer of gods, or Norberger, the god of assassins, Caden Kalen, the god of drunks and adventuring. Like, there's a ton of really good, very minor deities, including the new deity of artificial intelligence.
Yes. What's her name? Cassandali. Cassandali. Very cool. Very interesting idea. I love Numeria, and we should probably, I don't know, put a pin in this. We should talk about Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, like, as an adventure at some point.
We should,
for funsies. But I like thinking about this. I think thinking about artificial, like, magic intelligence, right? The fantasy settings in D&D have included things like golems from the very beginning, but they were just monsters, basically, right? There wasn't a lot of discussion of, given sufficient magical power, could you make them intelligent? What would that be like? Again, Eberron addressed this terrifically with its Warforged, but I really like Cassandali and Numeria and the androids and all these, artificial magically intelligent constructs and things like that. I think it's super interesting. And there's also, these minor deities are so cool. There's Erasni, who's basically Sylvanas from World of Warcraft. She was a crusader who was raised by Geb and then got set free, and now is like the patron queen of, or patron deity of, like, the spurned, or like whatever, which is both terrible, but also I'm like, that's kind of cool. I'm into that. That's, a little on the nose, but it's a fun deity. And there's like a bunch of little like mini ones that are powerful enough to be compelling, but aren't like part of the main pantheon. And Pathfinder Golarion does a great job with this.
Yeah. And like last, I'd say there's just like a lot of really good, incredibly great and weird concepts, right? And some of them are like maybe a little predictable. Okay, there's a pirate kingdom, right? But it's a pirate kingdom done really well. Oh, there's like two rival wizards, but they're like really interesting, right?
They're really
But there's also just some like absolutely bizarre stuff. Like there's a Narnia always winter land that's ruled by the Baba Yaga, but is currently ruled by Anastasia Romanoff.
That's right. That's right.
Like from Earth.
From Earth. Yeah.
The actual Anastasia. Yeah. And there's like a an island ruled by a gold dragon who does eugenics, but he's trying to be nice about it. Maybe he's super evil, though. It's
like nice eugenics. People who don't fit just get exiled.
Right.
They're not thrown into like a pit or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry. Hermea, I wrote this down. It was like really interesting. This gold dragon.
Okay, let's talk about like some of our favorite places.
Yeah.
Let's start with Hermea.
No. Sorry, to finish your point, there's a bunch of like really just like wild out there ideas, and sometimes they're just like dropped as like an offhand thing. Like, yeah, there was this one pharaoh who had sky pyramids and they flew through the air and then they killed him and now there's a bunch of upside down pyramids in the desert. Go have fun. Like, I just there's so many little things like that. So yeah, that answers the question of, I think, I hopefully answered the question of like why you should play in Golarion. Let's talk about some of our favorite
things. And warm woolen mittens, brown paper packages tied up with strings. These are a few of my favorite things. Cream-colored ponies and crisp apple strudels, doorbells and sleigh bells and schnitzel with noodles, wild geese that fly with the moon on their wings. These are a few of my favorite things. Girls in white dresses with blue satin sashes, snowflakes that stay
our
on
favorite
my
little
nose and
locales and
eyelashes.
places. Yeah, I think Hermea is one in that like there's endless intrigue and that you can place there. I think there's an adventure path that, or at least an adventure series devoted to it. I haven't read it. That maybe gets into some of the background. But like regardless of that, like the idea of, oh, there is a gold dragon trying to build like, a utopian quasi like libertarian like society on an island. And sometimes people kind of get snatched away to it, but what are they planning like with this project? You don't really know.
It's great because, like, yeah, according to the setting, he loves humans. He thinks that they're, he has a better opinion of them than like other dragons do or whatever. So he creates this, so theoretically his motives are pure, but then he only gathers the smartest and most beautiful, and then if their children are not up to snuff, they get exiled from the island. And it's funny. I kind of wish that they had made it a little bit more ambiguous, because like even if he's not doing eugenics, there's kind of like to me, I think it's like a little questionable, this sort of like society building of only the elite, but it's still
I know if you read the adventure, the whole hook of it is that like, oh yeah, the thing that seems too good to be true and is definitely sketchy is in fact very sketchy and very
is there a child in a closet somewhere and he's dirty and miserable and you have to walk away from Hermea sorry.
That is possibly the conclusion. I do not know though.
I mean, again,
Hermea is great.
It's super cool. Yeah.
What else? I think we mentioned chiliacs. They are maybe the most. It's kind of fun. It's like, okay, what if we took our biggest, human-ish, most familiar empire or kingdom in the land and made them just completely on the outside evil, right? They are devoted and sworn to Asmodeus, right?
Yeah.
He is their god, and that the thrice cursed house of Thune is super evil.
The ruling. I think Chiliax is great. It's a perfect place for an adventure, whether or not your players want to oppose and overthrow them or work within it or escape, whatever. I love Chiliax. I think, again, of the like things that emerged with Golarion, I think it's one of the most inspired. I think it's always been like very cool, and yeah, there's so much there. There's also a bunch of great adventure paths set in Chiliax or around Chiliax, and I can think of like 1,000 things to do with that. I really liked Rahadun, and I don't know that we've talked about it, but it's like an it's like an atheist desert nation, and it's
in a world where the gods are real and no one denies this.
Right. So like, let's do a little arrogance wager here, Matt. Let's do some like, so like in the real world, or in the world that is, again, I'm no longer a believer, but there's a question, if there is a god and you don't believe in him, then you can spend all your eternity in hell. So like maybe there's a reason to believe in a god. But in Golarion, in the fantasy realms, there's not a single, well, there are the hells, but there's not like, you don't go to hell for not believing in Iomedae. You don't go to hell for not worshiping Caden Kalian. Actually, I don't even really know theologically how you end up in hell. I think you just have to be bad. So like,
yeah, you have to be lawful evil or whatever. Phasma will judge your soul and send you
the point I'm
to the
making
correct
here
place.
is that even though gods are real and exist, it does not necessarily logically follow that you would need to or want to worship those gods. And that's kind of the idea behind Rahadum. It still allows magic and like non-god worshipping divines. Like there's druids there.
Druids are cool. We love druids.
I think every time this conversation comes up in like Reddit, a bunch of people get like bent out of shape about the existence of like atheists in a setting where you can see the actions of the divines. But no, I actually think it makes sense. Again, if you are not seeking something from a divine entity and you are you're not concerned about your eternal soul, it makes sense that you might be sort of like explicitly anti-theist. And I don't know, I like Rahadum. I think it's a interesting place, and I would definitely set an adventure there. It's a little like authoritarian in the way that it approaches like not worshiping gods, but that's again like another fun wrinkle, especially if you have like clerics or anybody, paladins in your party.
The or champions, as they are known in
champions.
Pathfinder 2nd edition. Let's see. My next favorite place is the River Kingdoms, in that if you are looking for, you're like, okay, Rob, Matt, all this sounds cool, but like the beginning of the adventure I've written out is like, oh, like kind of pretty normal standard stuff. The River Kingdoms is that, right? Yeah. There are marshes and unexplored forests and evil fae and owlbears and monsters and tiny duchies, but all the tiny duchies are very cool. And then all of the things that surround you are perfect. You have a demon forest. You have an elf forest. You have a kingdom where the ruler says he is a god, but is not. You have gothic horror. You have techno barbarians. You have Game of Thrones to your north, and to the east you have cyclopean ruins and marauding centaurs. Mm-hmm. It's like a great place to start, and then cool things around you.
I agree. River Kingdom is an awesome place to gently introduce your players to the setting. It's a lot better fit for like a small scale, clearing out goblin nests or whatever. And then you have the opportunity, if you're not following a campaign setting, you just sort of like want to see where your players or your campaign takes you. Exactly like Matt said, pretty much anything you want to do, you can just sort of strike out from the River Kingdoms. It is an awesome, and the little duchies are cool. They each have their own.
Oh, this is the assassin one. This is the one built in a massive ruined city, but there's only like 2,000 people living there. Yeah. There's a couple places like this in the campaign setting. Verissa is another one where like, you want to put a small town and kill some bandits and then go from there, is like that. Absalon, the city at the center of the world, is kind of like that if you want an urban setting. Yeah. And they're all surrounded by things that kind of, you can feel the volume on the adventure ramping up as you go out.
Actually, I have a gripe about this one, but I also kind of really like it. My next favorite one is Galt, which is...
Who is Galt?
Who which is hilariously named. Galt is part of the sort of Shining Kingdoms, which I guess are all sort of...
They're all former Taldor.
Yeah, parts of former Taldor. I really like... Sorry, this is one other thing. I really like that they've decreased the prominence of Taldor, because it was kind of that was one of their more boring settings, in my opinion. Yeah. And now it's still important, but like it's divided into like several much more interesting settings. Anyway, Galt is like in like a state of permanent revolution and has like no government. Currently there's like a first citizen, who rules like a demagogue that like rules the mob, and they have these magical guillotines that store the souls of everybody.
The final blades.
The final blade. And it's a very like dim view of like revolution and democracy, and I take a little issue with, but it's also like very funny and interesting to me. This like constantly, you know, nobody can rise to the top because they'll get guillotined. This perpetual chaos, you know, uber democratic nation. I would change some things about it, but I would absolutely like set you know, you could have so much fun with like just the revolution in general in Galt. I think it's awesome. It's a little goofy, but it's also like extremely fun to me.
Yeah. Galt is great. Also great is the Impossible Lands. So I'm talking here Geb, Nex, and between them, the Mana Wastes. And Geb and Nex are two, you know, archmages who have fought like 1,000-year war with each other, and they maybe forgot why. I feel like you can read the explanation somewhere. There's a lot of Geb slash...
I just didn't like each other. Yeah, there's a lot of Geb, Nex slash fic.
Yeah, oh yeah. And Geb is, you know, like an evoker, lightning power, planar power, and Nex is a evoker, lightning power. Geb is a like necromancy land, and both of the archmages have kind of moved on. Like one's a ghost, one is disappeared, maybe in an extraplanar realm, but like the weirdness of these places continues, and between them there's a place where magic is unpredictable, where firearms are more common. There's a new adventure path I haven't read yet, the Outlaws of Alcansar, where you get to be gunslingers in the weird wastes, you know, fighting mutants and stuff like that.
If I were going to set like a full campaign anywhere, it would be in the Impossible Lands. I think there's so much here. Alcanstar, I know it might not be for everybody because it's very like thematically, you know, a Western, and it's got guns. But what I love about it is, again, Golarion, the Pathfinder writers have asked the question, you know, what would cause firearms to emerge in a setting with magic, right? And if you had a place where magic didn't work or was unpredictable, it makes sense that you might, you know, if you were a people, a, you know, Wild West frontier civilization, that, you know, if guns were possible, they might start to emerge in a place like Alcanstar. And then from there, you get a lot of like cool and interesting ideas, and the closest to the Mana Wastes produces a lot of opportunity for adventure. There's a big dwarf sky fortress and a bunch of like underground dungeons nearby. It's just, there's so much going on here, and I think so much potential, even though this is a relatively small, both in terms of, you know, what's written about it and also in the setting itself. But I think the Impossible Lands is just super, super interesting. This is definitely one of Golarion's most interesting regions for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also in the Mwange expanses, the city of Namtambu, which I read about in one of their more recent adventure paths, that has just a very cool magic school. That after we reviewed the magic school adventure Strixhaven for Dungeons & Dragons, I was looking for other magic schools, and I kind of liked this one better. So if you're looking for a very cool magic school that like has a nice relationship with the city it's in, and the city it's in has other things going on besides the magic school, this is a nice one.
I also really liked Namtambu. I also really liked the 10 Magic Warriors. We talked about the different, you know, schools and factions, and this is something which is not, well, I think it's got more detail elsewhere, but even just like the limited description here, I was already like, here's a bunch of great ideas for adventuring, for artifacts, for personalities, NPCs, factions, whatever. This is just like such a, the thing I like about the Mwangi Expanse, and that I forgot to mention before, but I think Golarion does so well, is that they pay a lot of attention to cities. And Mwangi Expanse is all cities or city-states, or almost all cities or city-states. But they've been given so much detail and depth, and I this is something that I find in many other settings don't do to my satisfaction, because I'm very interested in cities and city campaigns, and I think that they're extremely important to even pre-modern settings. And so I really like this. I really like how they have approached this. I think it's super interesting.
Yeah. I also have to point out, it's not in this book. It's in their really great supplement, Distant Worlds. But we mentioned earlier, like, the solar system is really cool. A lot of it is like familiar enough to people who are like fans of like sword and planet fiction, right? There's a red waste planet and a tropical Venus planet, filled with the, Barsoom-esque things that you might expect. But there's also like a lot of other really cool planets, right? There's like a planet that shifts between 100-year winter and 100-year summer. There's a machine planet. There's a planet that's like a interstellar ship gone wrong. There's a Cthulhu planet. There's all the planets that you could want.
They did a really good job of the solar system, which again is something that I often think about when world building or when I'm reading these, but it's not usually something that's a priority. But I love that they have put the attention that they have into this. It means that if you wanted to, once our big beautiful Spelljammer reemerges, that you could easily borrow or in either direction, right? Take Spelljammer to Golarion or Golarion's planets to Spelljammer, one way or another, which I think is, again, another great
and you'll
thing
have
with the
like
setting.
12 planets to work with. Yeah, right off the bat. Any other favorite locations that people just gotta know about? I mean, we haven't talked about Tar-Baphon's prison or the land of the Lindorm Kings or Andor.
I like Andor.
Katapesh.
I liked for Vidrian, which there used to be a colony, Sargava, all the Cheliax colony and the Moang Expanse, and now it's some sort of independent, precarious fledgling nation. I think that's a really interesting setting. It's a bit like, what's that one in Eberron that's in the swamps and it's all like lizard folk? Kubara. I think those are just like interesting settings. I love a story about, I love subverting a colonialism story. I actually wanted to talk about Tar-Baphon. This is maybe a little bit of an aside, but I thought we could use a little bit of our time to talk about Tar-Baphon and talk about liches.
Sure.
Matt, I think we need to have an episode on liches because Tar-Baphon, Asarak, Vecna, a lot of our big bads in the greater Dungeons and Dragons oeuvre are liches. And I have reached the point where I am extremely bored with liches. I do not think that they are very good villains. Tar-Baphon's interesting. He's the whispering tyrant. He's been around forever. He was one of Erodin's earliest foes, and he keeps emerging, and he's now, created his own enormous army of undead and threatens the whole world. That's fine, whatever. But a lich, what does a lich want? What does a lich desire? What is a lich's? It's always like, they want to be the ruler of everything or ascend to godhood. Yeah, whatever. I think because by nature a lich is old and possibly immortal, if they had human motivations, if they had comprehensible motivations beyond the will to power at any point, they're shrouded in the distant past. And so I just don't find them very compelling. Matt, am I in the wrong here?
No, I understand why liches are, that like every setting seems to have like a lich big bad, right? Even including Eberron, right? In that it works so well in that they're a villain you can kill and
it's a vampire
kill again.
lich. It's better.
That's true.
It's a dragon vampire,
half dragon lich,
vampire lich. Anyway.
It's complicated, yeah.
And
their schemes can last centuries, right? And they're undeniably kind of evil in most campaign settings. So I understand the thing. There could be an opportunity there for like getting weird with liches, right? Giving them these inhuman motivations.
Let's put a pin in that, because I'd like to approach liches as a villain, as a motivation, because I do like I like, the long game. I like a villain that has a grand millennia spanning plan, but a lich only serves themselves. A lich is dead, so can't. I don't know. I have trouble with, like, why should I care? What does the lich want except to dominate and gain power, and to what end, right?
Yeah, it could be like we need to start thinking about phases of lichdom, right? Maybe there's a first phase where, like, okay, you sacrifice your humanity to gain immortality, but you still have, like, a lot of human thinking patterns in your undead brain, psyche, soul. And yes, a first phase lich is all about conquering lands and acquiring magic items. But then, like, they enter a weird second phase or a third phase where, like, they stop thinking like normal.
They have alien desires
people.
Or something. They're no longer comprehensible by mortals. Anyway,
and that's where they get really weird and maybe even more dangerous.
We'll come back to that. But yeah.
Okay. Liches aside, other favorite Golarion things. There's so much here that we can't even touch on. Like Saranre, like, speaking of major deities, really great, good, lawful god of the sun. So good that it's basically stolen completely in the Critical Role campaign setting and TV show. Also, Rovagog, god of monsters who births the Tarask and stuff, and is imprisoned in the
is
world.
Cool because every now and then Rovagog will just, like, or something will happen and he'll spit out, like, a horrible monster, which is, like, there's a big kaiju that you have to fight. Like, I think that's great. And I kind of like, it gives, like, a lot of opportunity for the setting officially, or for you to be like, now there's a giant rampaging whatever. It's a spawn of Rovagog, like Tarask is a spawn of Rovagog. I think an all-devouring, horrible monster deity is a good thing to have. You got to have Apep, Apet, whoever the crocodile that eats the sun in Egyptian mythology is.
Yeah, and that's Rovagog, god of kaijus. It's
that's right.
Great.
Apopis, Apep. I did say that I thought it was boring, but there's one thing I really like about Taldor. I sometimes pretend like I'm cynical, but sometimes I really do just, like, want to play a good guy doing good things. And, like, one of Taldor's, is it Taldor or is it Andoran? It's Andoran. Sorry,
Taldor's Spain, Andoran's America.
Andoran has the Eagle Knights, right? And their whole thing is they're anti-slavery, and they fight slavers and they free slaves. And I think that's an extremely, maybe not, like, particularly inspired, but, like, that is an extremely awesome core of any campaign. Is, like, your job is to liberate slaves, and you go and you fight Cheliax, and you go and you fight Kadira, and you go and you fight whatever, and you break those chains and you set people free. I always loved that as a part of the setting. I love that they acknowledge that slavery exists and there's people who want to fight it. I think that's, more mature than not answering the question or, not addressing that in a medieval setting there might be slaves or serfs or whatever. So that's always been one of my favorite things about Golarion.
Yeah. If I have any, like, major critiques of Golarion, like, they're always kind of fading from my mind because, just of the nature of the campaign setting, there is so much. And if there's something you don't like, you just kind of spin the globe a little bit. Again, one of the things
I reread this book this weekend, and, like, a bunch of stuff just, like, slid off of my brain. It was fine, but, like, I've already forgotten it.
I mean, my major critique is a structural one, which is I would love it if it, and again, like I said at the beginning, this is the one Arth setting that has moved the farthest away from not Arth, but it's still there, like, underlying everything, in that there's kind of a Europe, kind of an Africa, kind of a Indian, Middle East subcontinent, kind of a Central Asia, and then definitely and East Asia in the Dragon Kingdoms or something like that.
Xia or whatever.
Tian Xia. And I think the best campaign settings come up with a completely new configuration of world and cultures, and you could argue that the touchstone is nice, but it's not worth having the touchstone it just doesn't feel fantastical enough. It sucks. It brings problematic baggage, and yeah.
I agree, and I think that they've really struck out a long way. Like
Again, they've done the best they can.
They've done the best, and most of their, most of what used to be faux Spain, faux France, faux Egypt are now like much, much more interesting, and obviously like, not Africa is substantially more developed and much less problematic than it used to be. If any setting would benefit from a Crisis of Infinite Earths, I think it would be Golarion. I think if they wanted to shatter the globe and keep a lot of the good stuff, but get rid of the baggage, I think that would be awesome. And I hope that,
Well, the opportunity to do that, let's say the publishing of a brand new revolutionary edition has passed.
Yeah.
But
it may come again, I guess is what I'm saying. There will be, I don't know, maybe there won't be a Pathfinder 2.5 or 3.0 or whatever, but 5 years from now, maybe there's a new campaign setting, whatever. But that being said, yeah, they've done the best with the Earth, type setting of any of those that exist. And yeah, my critique is the same as Matt's, but again, it's very easy to ignore that because you just don't bother with the stuff that you're not interested in. It would be very difficult. Your players would have to work very hard to make you like involve or incorporate something that you're not interested in the setting. Like you can there's so much going on that is interesting. If there's something that you don't like or you think is kind of you can very easily ignore it.
If there's another critique, it's and I don't think this is a critique, is that the planes that Pathfinder does well are the first world. And I think that's really the only interesting addition to the D&D canon of planes. And yeah, it is just a better spin on the Feywild, invented maybe before the Feywild was invented. I remember reading about it before fourth edition came out.
Sure, but I'm pretty sure it came before the Feywild.
And it's great. There is not a lot of the great beyond in most of the adventure paths I've read. And that's fine. Golarion is a very material world focused setting, and the outer planes are just that. They are very weird and scary, and you can only go there with great difficulty.
I agree with this critique because compared to everything else, the planes are weak. What makes this critique not a particularly big deal, in my opinion, is that probably it is easier to steal a plane or many planes and add them to Golarion than anything else. Like that is, you can be done without impacting really anything. And so I would love to, I guess, to see what they did with like a book of the planes, because Paizo always does something so interesting, but it's not necessary.
Yeah. And again, like if you wanted to adapt a 5th edition adventure for this, there's no reason why Descent to Avernus wouldn't be great set in Cheliax, or a country that is no longer part of Cheliax, like Andor, because of some ancient demonic contract.
Actually, that would be a really interesting adjustment, and it would take some work, but I think it would be really, really, I think that would be really fun, actually. It's a good idea.
In moving towards closing thoughts, the big draw again here remains the 30 odd adventure paths and incredibly long adventures that you can set here. There are so many ones that I have played and run and played in that I have loved, others that I've read and said, wow, this is really interesting. Maybe it's a little too long. Iron Gods. There are so many cool ones.
Yeah. Oh God, man. And there's so many I still haven't read, and I haven't played in any of them. I haven't played in any of them since, or run any of them since like Reign of Winter. So I'm very far behind, but yeah, they're all great. There's a lot to recommend Golarion and Pathfinder in general. I would say there's no better time than now to play it. Whether you're playing 2nd edition or you're still sticking with the 1st edition, Pathfinder is in a really, really good place. Golarion is a really interesting setting at this point in time.
Again, it's perfect for just stealing a thing.
So yeah, whether or not you're playing in the setting or you just want to borrow, if you've got the Dosh, this is a good book to pick up. Big fan of the setting. A+ all around.
All right, another campaign setting down. Our valid opinions on it expressed to our viewers, so
That's
you know
right.
what to think about it.
Now you know
let's
the
put
correct opinion, the approach to Golarion, so you can
better know a campaign setting. Let's put it up on the big board.
That's right.
It's marked off. Golarion done.
Done. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you have thoughts or you want us to address something or just questions, please do write us at dmofnone@gmail.com. Add us on Twitter at dmofnone. Check out our Patreon at patreon.com/dungeonmasterofnone. You are all lovely. Please take care of yourselves. Stay healthy, stay safe.